He erased her name from the company she built. But what happens when the forgotten founder returns, with undeniable proof and a legacy they can't rewrite? This is the story of Claire Whitmore, a woman forced into the shadows by her own family, who chose not revenge, but truth. Through boardroom battles, hidden betrayals, and a father's final words, Claire fights to reclaim what was hers all along. Will she succeed, or will old power strike back? Stay tuned. You won't want to miss this. Chapter 1. The invitation that erased me. It wasn't the words that stung. It was the silence that followed them. The text arrived on a flat Wednesday morning, wedged between a reminder about my dental appointment and a spam ad for winter boots. From Evelyn Whitmore. Subject: Thanksgiving dinner. Message: dinner's at 6 this year. Don't be late, Claire. No hope to see you. No how have you been. No warmth. A line of logistics dressed up as an invitation, but not an invitation for me, an expectation. Like every Thanksgiving for the past 7 years, I stared at the screen, letting the words sit there. My fingers hovered over the reply box, but what was there to say? A yes wouldn't be appreciated. A no wouldn't be tolerated. Either way, I would show up, as I always did. Not because I was wanted, but because I refused to let them pretend I didn't exist. For 8 years, I had stood quietly at the edges of this family, watching as the narrative was rewritten, watching as the company I helped save became Vanessa's empire in the eyes of the public. But this year something in the air felt different, heavier, colder. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was the thin layer of dust still coating the folder labeled contingency in my desk drawer. Maybe it was the message itself, a line so stripped of pretense it almost tasted like dismissal. I closed my laptop. The decision was made. The driveway of the Whitmore estate hadn't changed. High iron gates, a stretch of cobblestone too polished to be walked on, 2 fountains flanking the entrance like guardians of old money. It looked like something out of a lifestyle magazine. A life I had once thought I belonged to. I parked behind Vanessa's brand new black Mercedes, its paint shimmering under the desert sun. Scottsdale's November wasn't cold, but the air still carried that sharp crispness, the kind that cut through skin when paired with the wrong kind of conversation. I took a breath, smoothed the front of my navy-sheathed dress, and stepped out. The door swung open before I could knock. Evelyn stood there, impeccably tailored in a deep emerald dress, her signature strand of pearls gleaming at her throat. "Oh good, you brought wine," she said, taking the bottle of Pinot Noir from my hand without so much as a glance upward. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't even meet my eyes. Inside, the house hummed with a strange kind of warmth, the brittle kind that covered cracks in wallpaper and fractures in family. The polished mahogany table gleamed under a chandelier older than me. The air smelled of rosemary and citrus and the kind of perfume only women who'd never stepped into a boardroom wore. Vanessa's voice floated from the den. "Claire's here. Well, there's a miracle." A ripple of laughter followed. I walked into the kitchen, slipping past staff and half-familiar faces. Vanessa stood by the marble counter, radiant as ever, hair perfectly set, smile wide enough to split stone. She barely glanced at me as she handed a stack of place cards to Gwen. "Make sure Claire's at the far end." Of course, I thought. I had spent years standing at the far end. In meetings, in photographs, in memories. The quiet one, the shadow, the sister who never quite found her footing. I set the wine on the counter and reached for a tray of hors d'oeuvres. If nothing else, I still remembered how to be useful. By the time dinner was served, my seat was waiting, tucked between the sideboard and the wall. The kind of place you gave a distant relative or a business associate you no longer needed. From there, I had a clear view of the show. Vanessa dominated the room effortlessly, her voice the perfect balance of charm and calculation. "I've been asked to consult on a new expansion strategy with Eastline Ventures," she said, slicing her turkey like a queen carving territory. "After my last keynote, They called me a pioneer in modern branding. Applause followed, soft but insistent. Evelyn beamed. Uncle Richard murmured something about legacy, and then someone, half drunk, half curious, turned to me. "And what about you, Claire? What have you been working on?" I opened my mouth, but Vanessa's smile sharpened. "She's between things," she chimed in, voice dipped in honey and steel. "Not everyone's built to build, some just observe. It's cute." Laughter rippled again. Evelyn chuckled softly, eyes fixed on her plate. No one defended me. No one looked up. It wasn't the words that stung, it was the silence that followed them. I took a sip of wine. It didn't help. The rest of the meal passed in a blur of curated conversations. Stocks, vacation homes in Aspen, some influencer partnership Vanessa had just inked. I watched her pass out instructions for cleanup, like a commander distributing orders after a well-fought battle. "Be a darling, Claire," she said, pushing a stack of wine glasses toward me. "Just like old times. Rinse these, will you?" Another ripple of laughter, light and effortless. Not malicious, not overt. The kind of laughter people use when they've decided you no longer matter. I carried the glasses to the kitchen, each step heavier than the last. Standing beneath the bright kitchen lights, scrubbing crystal, I felt 15 again, invisible, unchosen, only useful when convenient. I thought of the graduation ceremony, where no one had shown, the startup pitch I had sent to Vanessa, only to receive silence, the job offers, the promotion, the late nights spent structuring a rescue deal that kept the company afloat when the banks refused Vanessa's calls. None of it mattered here, not in this house, not at this table. Here I was just the sister who brought the wine and washed the glasses. I wiped my hands, poured myself another glass, and returned to the dining room. No one looked up. As I sat back down, something shifted, not in them, but in me. It wasn't rage, it wasn't sadness. It was something quieter, sharper. I smiled, not out of politeness, but out of recognition. They had no idea who I really was. Not yet. I drove home through the dark streets of Scottsdale, headlights carving through silence. Inside my apartment, the air felt too still, too intentional. I didn't turn on the TV, didn't check my phone. Instead, I sat at my small desk by the window, fingers hovering above the keyboard. The words looped in my head. She's between things, cute, and the silence that had followed. I reached into the bottom drawer and pulled out a manila folder, the label written in neat black Sharpie, contingency. I hadn't touched it in months, not because I had forgotten, because I had hoped I wouldn't need it. Now I knew better. Inside the folder, my documented equity stake, signed, notarized, the valuation analysis I had run 2 years ago at 3 a.m. when I realized the numbers Vanessa presented to the board wouldn't hold. Contracts, board communications, time-stamped revisions, clean, airtight. Silas had helped me structure it, quietly, without asking why. Now I finally knew the answer. They weren't just pretending I hadn't contributed. They were rewriting history, so I had never been there at all. The screen of my phone lit up, a new notification. Grateful for everyone behind this journey. Couldn't have done it without my team. Vanessa's latest post, shining in bold letters. I opened it, scanned the tags. Her PR director, her photographer, even her interior designer, and then my name, flashing once, then gone. The tag had been added, then removed. Not an accident. Not this time. I set the phone down, face first on the table, palms open on my lap, breath steady, not hurt, not surprised. Done. I stood, walked to the filing cabinet in the corner and pulled out another folder. This one marked trigger conditions. Inside, legal pre-approvals, internal communications, arbitration clauses, quietly prepared in case Vanessa ever pushed too far. I flipped through the pages, eyes scanning each line, each signature. This wasn't about revenge. It was about correction. The wine glass sat untouched on the counter. The city hummed softly beyond the window, the skyline etched against an indigo sky. I powered on my laptop and began compiling, file by file, page by page, building not a battle, but a case. "They won't see it coming," I whispered, voice steady, because they had never really seen me at all. As I clicked save on the first batch of documents, my inbox chimed again. Subject line, invitation, East Line Ventures Gala. I opened it. Guest, Claire Whitmore. No mention of founder. No board member, just guest. Dress code, black tie. Cocktails at 6. I stared at the screen, lips curving slowly. "Let's begin," I thought, and clicked accept. "So, what do you think will happen next to Claire Whitmore?" Stay tuned for the next chapter to find out. Chapter 2, The Sale They Never Told Me. The worst betrayal isn't theft, it's erasure. The invitation to the East Line Ventures Gala sat in my inbox like a dare. They had written me off as guest. It was a subtle move, but deliberate. One more brick in the wall they were building to write me out of this story. And if they thought I would play along quietly, they had underestimated me yet again. I clicked accept, not because I cared to toast to Vanessa's narrative, but because I had every intention of dismantling it, piece by piece. The morning of the gala, I kept my usual routine. Coffee brewed, laptop opened. But as I scrolled through my notifications, one headline caught my eye. And with it, the breath caught in my throat. East Line Ventures acquires 22% stake in Whitmore & Co. in record-breaking 8-figure deal. The blood drained from my face. I clicked the link, fingers tightening around the mouse. There she was. Vanessa, front and center, beaming beneath a headline that all but screamed one woman, one empire, no mention of the board. No mention of the silent partner who had kept that empire from collapse. No mention of me. And I hadn't been briefed, hadn't been consulted, hadn't even been given the courtesy of a warning. A 22% stake, a shift that would alter the very control structure of the company I still legally owned 51% of. And yet somehow I had been left in the dark. Not an oversight, an intention. I slammed my laptop shut and grabbed my phone. The first number I called was silent. He answered on the first ring. "You saw it. Front page." My voice was flat. And I'm going in." "Claire, wait." "No, I'm not waiting anymore." The drive to Whitmore & Co.'s headquarters was a blur of desert light and adrenaline. The glass tower gleamed against the Arizona sky, sleek, modern, empty of the history it pretended to honor. At reception, the assistant looked up with practiced poise. "Good morning, Ms. Whitmore. The boardroom is in prep for this afternoon. Are you—" "I'm here for the org chart review." A flicker of surprise crossed her face. Then, as if remembering a script, she smiled. "Of course, it's ready in the conference room." I stepped inside the glass-walled room, heart pounding beneath a veneer of calm. There it was, a stack of documents laid out neatly. I flipped to the latest org chart, eyes scanning fast. And then I saw it. Operational support, non-core advisory. My name, stripped of founder, stripped of board member, filed neatly into a corner of irrelevance. I stared at the words, a slow burn rising from my chest. They were making it official. Not just in public, not just in PR, here, in the bones of the company itself. A voice broke my focus. "Claire, didn't expect to see you in today." Vanessa's tone oozed casual superiority as she stepped inside, flawless in a cream power suit. "You're keeping busy, I see." I folded the paper slowly, placed it into my bag. "So are you," I said, evenly. "Quite the deal you've orchestrated." She smiled, the kind of smile that meant to disarm but only deepened the cut. "The board voted. The timing was perfect. You know how these things move fast. And somehow I wasn't briefed. "Oh, Claire." She laughed lightly, eyes sharp as glass. "You've been so between things. We didn't want to bother you." There it was, the same condescension now weaponized. But I didn't flinch. I simply met her gaze and said, "You'll regret that oversight." Later, in the privacy of my apartment, I pulled out the trigger conditions folder again. My pulse steady, my resolve set. They wanted to move fast, so would I. I drafted an email to Silas. "Prepare the attribution files. We're going on record." I hit send. And as the message disappeared into the ether, another notification lit up my screen. Eastline GALA, final guest list confirmed. I opened it. My name, still listed as guest. Good. Let them underestimate me one more time. I smiled. They wouldn't get another chance. The sun dipped low over Scottsdale by the time I slipped into the black velvet dress I hadn't worn in years. It fit tighter now. Maybe my body had changed, or maybe I had. In the mirror, my reflection stared back with a steadier gaze than I remembered. I clipped on simple pearl earrings, swiped on crimson lipstick. Not for them. For me. If they wanted me invisible, I would walk in as sharp as a blade they couldn't ignore. The Eastwell Hotel glittered against the desert dusk, its rooftop terrace glowing beneath cascading lights. Streams of jazz floated over the clink of crystal and the murmur of old money gathering to toast itself. I arrived alone. The hostess barely glanced at my name. "Ah, guest of Whitmore & Co. Right this way, Miss Whitmore." Guest. Each repetition carved deeper, but sharpened me further. I followed her across imported stone tiles, the cool evening air bristling with expectation. The terrace buzzed with familiar faces. Investors, influencers, board members I'd once negotiated beside. Now, they barely registered me. I set my clutch on the designated table and scanned the crowd. And then, movement at the entrance drew every gaze. Vanessa. Of course. She swept in draped in ivory satin, smile rehearsed to perfection. But it wasn't her alone. Reed walked beside her, tailored navy suit, hand at the small of her back, the same touch he'd once reserved for me. I watched as he guided her forward, their bodies aligned like a perfectly staged tableau. "Everyone, please welcome our new brand strategy consultant, Reed Lawson." Applause rose in polite waves. Not a flicker of hesitation crossed his face, not even when his gaze passed the crowd and deliberately skipped over me. I sipped champagne, tasting nothing but air. 20 minutes later, Reed took the mic. "Tonight I want to talk about legacy branding, not just what we build, but who gets to write the story." The words hit like a punch. I knew that line. I had said it months ago, on my couch, in a moment of late-night brainstorming when we thought we were building something together. I stood frozen as Reed wove through my own philosophies, repackaging them in his polished cadence. "It's not just about message," he continued. "It's about whose voice shapes the future." Applause again. Louder this time. My fingers curled tight around the stem of my glass, knuckles whitening. He hadn't just borrowed my words. He had stolen my voice. Needing air, I moved to the balcony. The desert skyline sprawled beneath the twilight, indifferent and vast. That's when I felt a tap on my shoulder. "Claire." I turned to see Julia Bennett, seasoned financial reporter, sharp-owned and sharper-tongued. We exchanged polite smiles, both aware of the unspoken undercurrents rippling through the night. "Big move with Eastline," she said casually. "So I've heard," I replied, voice cool. Julia tilted her head. "You're kidding. They closed 22% equity last week. 8-figure deal. It's everywhere." "I wasn't briefed," I said, watching her eyes widen. "Seriously?" "Claire." "Yes, seriously." Julia hesitated, then offered a knowing look. "You might want to get ahead of that story." "I intend to." Back inside, The night swelled toward its staged crescendo. Vanessa stood by the stage, martini in hand, a ring of admirers orbiting her. I crossed the floor, each step measured. "Enjoying yourself?" she asked, voice silky. "Immensely," I answered. "You've made this a game. I just want to remind you, I wrote the rules." Her smile sharpened. "Then rewrite them. Let's see if anyone's still reading." I didn't give her the satisfaction of a reaction. I walked away. Later that night, back in my apartment, I peeled off the dress with methodical calm. I opened the fireproof safe in my closet and retrieved the folder marked Trigger Conditions. Inside, arbitration clauses, legal pre-approvals, internal communications Vanessa had signed, now damning in their clarity. I drafted the email with deliberate precision. Effective immediately, I request clarity regarding the East Line stake sale for which I was neither consulted nor briefed. Transparency is a shared value unless it isn't. I copied the board, legal counsel, the COO, no emotion, just facts. I hit send. As the message disappeared, my phone buzzed. 5 new emails. I opened the first one. Company pioneer steps back amid restructuring. The headline blazed across the screen. I read it twice. Fine, I thought. Then let's restructure everything. What do you think will happen next? Stay tuned for the next chapter to find out. Chapter 3. The shadow they called an erase. If they think I'm a shadow, they should fear the dark. I woke early, long before the desert sun painted Scottsdale in gold. Sleep had been shallow, broken by flickers of images. Reed on stage, speaking my words. Vanessa's sharp smile. The headline announcing my supposed step back. But this morning, the fog of emotion had cleared. I wasn't angry, not anymore. I was ready. Steam curled from my mug as I sat at the kitchen island, laptop open before me. The email from last night had triggered waves I could already feel building. A flurry of automated out-of-office replies, one terse note from the COO, acknowledged, we will review, and silence from Vanessa. The silence spoke louder than any reply. They were scrambling. I clicked open a folder I hadn't touched in months, R1 to attribution files. Line by line, I began compiling. Initial strategy decks, annotated in my handwriting. Early drafts of brand architecture. Emails where Vanessa explicitly referenced my frameworks, the financial models I had built during the critical refinancing phase. Signed, time-stamped. Each file felt like a brick. Together, they formed the foundation of a narrative they couldn't erase. As I worked, a ping interrupted the rhythm, a message from Silas. See this. Attached was a link to a blog post. Amateur-looking but calculated. Behind the glam, the bitter sister trying to tear it down. I clicked. The language was familiar. Sharp enough to wound, vague enough to avoid legal trouble. A once promising contributor who failed to adapt. A shadow figure clinging to outdated influence. No names. But no one would mistake who it referenced. Phrases lifted directly from conversations I'd heard at Evelyn's dinner table. Only one source could have fed those lines. Gwen. I traced the site metadata, anonymously registered, but the placeholder contact linked to an address I recognized, one tied to Gwen's PR platform. I stared at the screen, a cold clarity settling in. They weren't just ignoring me anymore. They were trying to discredit me before I could speak. 15 minutes later, Silas arrived at my apartment, tablet in hand. You saw it, he said without preamble. I saw it. He slid the tablet across the counter. Full breakdown, contributions, contracts, version control history. Your pitch? Her voice. The overlap is surgical. I scrolled through the comparison. Slide decks mirror down to font choices, margins, structure, even phrasing lifted verbatim from my original strategy documents. We're past emotion now, Silas said quietly. This is about record. Then let's build the record. We spent the rest of the morning assembling the presentation. Tight, minimal, lined with timestamps and polite footnotes that left no room for excuses. Every claim sourced, every attribution backed, no spin, no theatrics, just facts. By early afternoon, the final file was ready. Clarification, strategic attribution. I uploaded it to the board's internal portal, heart steady. As the sun dipped lower, the city beyond my window pulsed with life, indifferent to the corporate war brewing behind glass doors. I poured another cup of tea and sat back, eyes lingering on the skyline. I thought of my father, his voice rough with age but clear. If they don't think you in time, don't wait. The truth has its own clock. I whispered the words aloud, and mine just started ticking. Another ping drew my attention, a board alert. Board session confirmed, Friday, 9 a.m. Agenda item added, review of strategic contributions and attributes. The subject line blinked on the screen like a countdown. I smiled, a slow, quiet smile. Let them prepare their stories. I was ready with mine. The morning of the board session arrived, cloaked in a strange stillness. I rose before dawn, showered in silence, dressed with deliberate care. No jewelry, no soft edges, a tailored black suit, hair pinned back, not a founder seeking validation, a strategist claiming space. The ride to Whitmore & Co. was a blur of desert light and calculated breathwork. This was no ordinary meeting. The agenda had shifted, and they knew I had the facts. At reception, the same assistant greeted me with forced composure. "Good morning, Miss Whitmore. The boardroom is prepared." "I'm sure it is," I replied, voice even. Her gaze flickered as I passed. They were rattled. Good. Inside the boardroom, sunlight slanted through floor-to-ceiling windows. The usual gloss of polished wood, bottled water, legal pads waiting like silent witnesses. Around the table, familiar faces, some expectant, some avoidant, and one chair conspicuously empty, Vanessa's. Instead, her legal representative sat stiffly at the far end, arms crossed. Of course, Vanessa had chosen absence over confrontation. A mistake. The COO cleared his throat. "Let's begin. First agenda item, strategic contributions and attribution." Eyes turned toward me. I rose, laptop in hand, connected to the projector. The first slide illuminated the screen. Vision isn't about seeing the future. It's about remembering who helped build it. Vanessa's own words from her TEDx talk. I let the silence settle before speaking. "A beautiful line," I began, tone neutral, but words without credit are hollow. Click. Next slide. The original pitch deck, my version, time-stamped 6 months before the TEDx event, side by side with Vanessa's final version. Slide by slide, phrase by phrase, the foundation was mine. I clicked through each one. Visual proof rippled through the room. Some board members leaned forward, brows furrowed. Others glanced nervously toward the empty seat meant for Vanessa. I continued. Steady. During the refinancing crisis, I personally structured the capital rescue that preserved controlling interest. Click $1.50 M. Personal wire transfer receipt. Here are the internal emails confirming board acknowledgement. Emails that are now, curiously, absent from official archives. Click Archived backups. Retrieved legally. The room grew colder with each slide. The legal rep shifted uncomfortably but remained silent. Good. He had nothing to counter with. Finally, I addressed the recent attempt at public discredit. And then? This blog. Click screenshot of Behind the Glam post. Phrases lifted directly from internal conversations. Traced to a PR contact linked to Gwen Hartley, Miss Whitmore's PR lead. Another shift in the room. One board member audibly whispered, "Jesus." I faced them fully now. "You have 3 choices," I said clearly. 1. Update records to acknowledge joint strategy ownership. 2. Adjust equity recognition accordingly. 3. Arbitration. I am not here for revenge, I am here for correction. I closed the laptop softly. No dramatics, no need. The record now spoke louder than any voice in the room. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. And then, procedural voices resumed. "Thank you for your time, Miss Whitmore. We will be in touch." Which meant they needed to huddle. Good. Let them. I left the room with unhurried steps. As I passed reception, the assistant's gaze followed me. Not with dismissal this time, with something closer to respect or fear. I welcomed both. Outside, sunlight hit my shoulders as I crossed the tiled plaza. I drew a deep breath. Not shaky, not from nerves, from power. Back at my apartment, the city lights flickered to life. I poured a glass of wine and refreshed my inbox. At 10:03 p.m., a new article went live. Whispers of a silent takeover at Whitmore & Co. I didn't smile. I didn't flinch. I simply turned my phone face down and opened a new file. Next moves. Any guesses on what's in store for Claire Whitmore? Let's find out together in the next chapter. Chapter 4. The gala they weren't ready for. They built this night to erase me. I built it to remind them who still owns the frame. The invitation arrived in a sleek ivory envelope, heavy with the kind of pretense old money loves to display. Gold foil edges, embossed lettering. GALA celebration. 10 years of visionary leadership. I traced the words with a steady finger. Visionary leadership. Vanessa's name was the only one featured in the program draft, attached digitally a few hours later. Not founders, not board members, just Vanessa Whitmore, visionary, architect, pioneer. I poured myself a glass of wine and let the words sit. This wasn't a gala, it was a coronation, and they intended for me to be part of the backdrop, if seen at all. But I had other plans. The afternoon before the gala, an unmarked package arrived at my door. Inside, a single black leather-bound folder. Silas' note was clipped to the front. Final copy, use as needed. I opened it carefully. Inside, every notarized document, every time-stamped communication, every legal seal, verifying my controlling interest. 51%. It was more than ownership. It was leverage. And tonight, the timing was perfect. I arrived at the Desert Sky Convention Center just as twilight settled over the Arizona sky. The building glittered beneath floodlights, its glass facade shimmering like a beacon of polished lies. I moved through the main corridor alone, heels clicking softly against marble floors, pulse steady beneath my tailored black silk suit. Not a dress, not this time. I wasn't here to blend in. I was here to be seen. The ballroom gleamed with excess. Crystal chandeliers hung like constellations. Branded photo walls bore Vanessa's face at every turn, captioned in bold, "Rebuild with elegance, scale with soul." My line, I noted silently. I lingered near the back wall, a deliberate shadow. Silas joined me quietly, dressed with the same understated purpose. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't need to. "Just watch," he said softly. I nodded once. I was ready. The lights dimmed. A slow-motion montage began to play. Vanessa's greatest hits. Ribbon cuttings, charity auctions, tech talks. Her voice layered over the footage. Tonight isn't about where we've been. It's about where we're headed. Together. Applause swelled. Choreographed. Practiced. Paid for. Then she stepped onto the stage, clad in an emerald satin gown that shimmered under the spotlights. She moved with calculated grace, each gesture designed to project power. 10 years ago, this company was a dream. Today, it's a legacy. A legacy built on vision, resilience, and heart. More applause. I remained still, heart steady, breath even. She began thanking her inner circle, the PR firm, the branding consultants, the interior designer, even her yoga coach, but not the woman who had worked 70-hour weeks to keep the company from dissolving. Then came the final blow, and a special thanks to L. Ramsey. whose vision reshaped our strategic trajectory. I felt the heat rise in my chest. L. Ramsey, a junior consultant I had mentored, the same one who had panicked before a major client pitch, and whom I had guided through every detail of the presentation now being paraded as her own. Silas's jaw tightened beside me. I didn't flinch, but my fingers curled slightly against the folder in my clutch. Not yet. Soon. The applause was thunderous. Cameras flashed. Vanessa basked beneath the glow, unaware of the shadow now moving toward the light. I glanced at Silas. He gave a subtle nod. It was time. I stepped away from the back wall, heels sharp against the marble floor. The hush grew louder with every step I took down the center aisle. Heads turned. Whispers rippled across the room. Claire Whitmore. "What is she?" The MC faltered, glancing towards Silas, who stood poised near the side curtain, a small shake of his head. "Don't interfere." I reached the podium, placing the leather-bound folder down with deliberate care. One breath, then I opened it. The weight of the room shifted the moment I placed the leather-bound folder on the podium. Every pair of eyes tracked my every move. Vanessa's smile faltered, not visibly to most, but to me, it was unmistakable. The PR assistant beside her whispered something, knuckles whitening around a cocktail napkin. Good. They knew, or they were about to. I opened the folder with deliberate care, each movement calculated, slow. No theatrics, no raised voice, just gravity. I looked out at them. Board members, investors, stakeholders, and socialites who had swallowed the curated version of this company's history. 2 years ago, I began, voice clear, steady. This company stood 72 hours from default. Silence swept the room. No polite coughs, no clinks of glass. "The acquisition deal you all celebrated?" I clicked a small remote, bringing up a slide on the projection screen. That wasn't magic. That was me. A wire transfer receipt appeared. $1,500,000, 0 cents wired from my personal account to cover emergency obligations and secure vital contracts. I refinanced the debt. I secured the contracts. I acquired a controlling interest. 51%. I let that sentence hang in the air. In the back of the room, someone gasped. Near the front, a champagne flute shattered against the tile. A PR assistant gripped Vanessa's arm so tightly her fingers turned white. Vanessa didn't blink, but I saw it, the faintest tension in her jaw. I advanced the slide deck. Here is the legal documentation of my equity stake. Verified, notarized, and forcible. I paused to let the seals and signatures speak for themselves. Here are the original strategy decks, time-tamped versions I authored. More slides, more proof. And here are internal communications extracted from verified archives demonstrating full acknowledgement of my contributions by the board and executive team. A ripple of unease spread through the crowd. Investors exchanged wary glances. Several board members shifted in their seats. Truth was sinking in. Slow, undeniable. I did not come here to take credit. I looked directly at Vanessa now. I came to take back my name. Her gaze remained fixed, mask-like, but her silence was deafening. I closed the folder gently. The record stands. The story you've tried to rewrite, my voice sharpened, will not erase me. A final slide illuminated the screen behind me. Claire Whitmore, founder, 51% controlling stake board member. There it was. In black and white, the applause didn't come immediately. It didn't need to. The impact had already landed. Irreversible. I stepped away from the podium, heels clicking against the marble. No one dared stop me. No one could. The path through the crowd parted without a word. Eyes followed me, not with dismissal this time, with respect. Or fear. Both were acceptable. Outside, the cool desert air struck my skin like a balm. Real. Honest. I drew a long breath, exhaled slowly. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. By the time I reached my car, my phone was already vibrating. I ignored the first 3 calls. On the 4th buzz, I glanced at the screen. Silas, board wants to meet. They're calling you first thing. I leaned back against the seat, staring up at the star-sprinkled sky. Let them, I whispered. This time, we finish it. What happens next? Stay tuned for the next chapter. Chapter 5, the boardroom they tried to lock me out of. When the door finally opens, you don't knock, you walk in. The morning light over Scottsdale was unseasonably sharp, slicing through the blinds of my apartment like truth through a lie. By 7:00 a.m. I was dressed, a charcoal gray suit, no jewelry, no softness, just clean lines and clarity. The board had called an emergency session, 9:00 sharp. Not that I needed the invite, 51% didn't need permission. As the car pulled up in front of Whitmore and Cole's tower, my phone buzzed again. Vanessa is coming, expect spin. Of course she was. After last night's public unraveling, Vanessa couldn't afford another empty chair. But the game had changed. Now the narrative was mine to shape. In the lobby, the same assistant barely met my eyes. Good morning, Miss Whitmore. The boardroom is ready. Good, I replied evenly. So am I. I rode the elevator alone, watching the floors tick upward. Each number felt like a countdown, not to a fight, to a reckoning. When the doors opened, the room was already half full. Board members sat in stiff clusters, voices hushed. The air thrummed with a tension so thick it might as well have been scripted. At the far end of the table, Vanessa, draped in navy silk, perfectly composed. But beneath the practiced smile, I saw it. The hairline crack. She looked up as I entered. No words, no acknowledgement, but the slightest flicker of something in her eyes. Fear. I took my seat without hesitation. The chair of the board, Richard Foster, cleared his throat. We are convened today to address matters raised during last night's event, as well as to clarify ownership and leadership moving forward. A beat. Claire has requested to speak first. I rose, laptop in hand. No request, I corrected calmly. Right, and with that, I began. The same slides, the same receipts, but this time under oath of record. 51% controlling stake, documented and verified. Strategic frameworks, authored and time-stamped. Rescue financing, executed personally to preserve corporate solvency. Each statement landed like a gavel. The legal counsel beside Richard shifted uncomfortably. The COO looked down at his notes, no longer attempting eye contact. Finally, I addressed the room fully. Last night's narrative was not only incomplete, it was false. I clicked one final slide. Behind the glam of the blog post, this was circulated less than 72 hours before our scheduled board review. IP trace logs linked the source to Gwen Hartley, operating under Ms. Whitmore's PR division. I let the silence expand. This is not leadership. This is subversion. Vanessa's voice broke the hush. Claire, with respect, this is being blown out of proportion. We were managing a narrative under time constraints. You chose to disengage from the day-to-day. Incorrect, I interrupted smoothly. I disengaged from a system that sought to erase me. That is not the same as absence. Gasps from the table. Several members exchanged looks. Allies shifting. Richard exhaled heavily. Claire, what is your position moving forward? I met his gaze directly. My position is clear. I will exercise my controlling rights fully. Effective immediately, all strategic decisions require my approval. The days of selective inclusion are over. Another beat, and Gwen's employment status is to be reviewed immediately. I sat down. Vanessa's mask cracked, just slightly, but enough. The room had turned as the chair moved to adjourn. My phone buzzed beneath the table. Silas, get ready. The archive files just surfaced. You'll want to see this. I kept my expression neutral, even as adrenaline surged. Another card to play. And this time, they wouldn't see it coming. The boardroom emptied slowly, one cluster at a time. I remained seated, spine straight, gaze fixed on the city skyline through the glass. I wanted them to see me stay seated, centered, unmoved. Vanessa lingered near the doorway, exchanging a few clipped words with Richard, her tone low and tight. I didn't need to hear them to know she was losing ground, and this time no curated story would patch the cracks. As soon as the last board member stepped out, I rose, retrieved my folder, and made my way down the hall. The hum of the building felt different now, less indifferent, more electric. Eyes followed me through the corridors that once treated me like a phantom. I didn't smile, I didn't acknowledge them, let them wonder. By the time I reached my office, my phone buzzed again. Silas. Archive files decrypted. You're going to want to see this. Come by now. On my way. Silas's workspace had always been sparse, functional, no ego in sight. But today the center screen glowed with rows of recovered documents. He greeted me with a curt nod. I traced old server backups, ones that should have been purged when Vanessa's PR restructured our data archives. They weren't. What did you find? This. He clicked open a folder titled E. Whitmore Private Correspondence. I felt my breath catch. Mother. She wasn't just sitting out this fight, she's been orchestrating parts of it for years. Silas scrolled through email threads, personal messages between Evelyn and Vanessa. Ensure Claire's visibility is minimized post-deal. Her equity position complicates our external narrative. Advise Gwen to manage perception subtly. No direct attack. Once the new stakeholder structure is finalized, we revisit share transfer conversations. Claire will not have veto power indefinitely. I inhaled slowly. She lied, I whispered. She told me she had no memory of promising to transfer shares after Father passed. Silas met my gaze. She remembered just fine. She planned around it. Rage wasn't what I felt. It was something colder. Betrayal calcified into purpose. I reached for the next folder Silas had flagged. Legal drafts, internal transfers. There it was, a draft share transfer agreement, unsigned but prepared, listing a backdated clause that would have effectively stripped me of my majority stake had I not stepped forward now. She was waiting for me to fade out. One more narrative piece to close. But you didn't, Silas said simply. No, I said, voice steady. And I won't. I copied the files to an encrypted drive and slid it into my bag. This needs to go on record first thing. Already prepped, Silas replied. And Claire, yes? There's one more thing. Check the old video archives when you're ready. Your father's files weren't all deleted. I paused. What do you mean? You'll see. Thought you should open that one yourself. Back in my apartment, I stared at the encrypted drive sitting next to my laptop. Hands steady, I inserted it and navigated to the flagged folder. Personal V. Whitmore Legacy 2016. Video, 1 file. Timestamped 3 months before my father passed. I hesitated only a second before clicking play. The screen flickered to life. My father sat at his study desk, eyes tired but sharp, voice rough. If they don't thank you in time, don't wait. The truth has its own clock, and you're the reason this family still stands. The video ended abruptly, screen fading to black. I leaned back, breath caught between steel and surrender. You saw me, I whispered into the silence. You knew. I opened a new email to the board. Further documentation regarding internal equity manipulation attached. Expect full presentation at next session. This is not a request, it is a record. I hit send. My phone buzzed within seconds. Richard. Understood. We'll reconvene. Be prepared. Vanessa is moving fast. He smiled. A thin, knowing smile. So am I. What do you think will happen next? Share your thoughts below and stay tuned for the next chapter. Chapter 6. The name they called an erase. When they erase your name from the story, the most powerful move is to write the ending yourself. The morning of the final board session arrived under a sky thick with storm clouds. Rare for Arizona, but fitting. There was no more pretending now, no more curated narratives. Today wasn't about who smiled for the cameras, it was about who held the pen. I dressed with the same deliberate precision as before. Charcoal suit, no embellishments. The encrypted drive containing the archive files rested in my briefcase like a blade sharpened for this moment. I glanced once at my father's recorded words, still paused on my laptop screen. The truth has its own clock. I closed the lid gently. That clock was ringing now. The ride to Whitmore & Co. was silent, save for the steady thrum of rain against the windshield. In the lobby, the same assistant met me with an expression caught between anxiety and awe. "Good morning, Ms. Whitmore. The board is waiting." I know. As I stepped into the boardroom, the energy shifted instantly. Every seat was filled this time. No empty chairs. Vanessa sat poised at the far end, clad in a steel grass suit that mirrored the weather outside. But her posture betrayed her, shoulders tense, fingers drumming lightly against the polished wood. She was bracing for impact. She had every reason to. Richard opened the meeting without pleasantries. "We are reconvened to address new evidence provided by Ms. Whitmore. Claire, the floor is yours." I rose, connected the drive to the central display. "Thank you. I will be brief. The documents I am about to present confirm intentional efforts to manipulate internal equity structures and public narratives, efforts led by Vanessa Whitmore, with strategic guidance from Evelyn Whitmore." A sharp intake of breath from across the table. I clicked through the slides with measured precision. Emails confirming Evelyn's orchestration of the fade-out strategy. Draft share transfer agreements designed to strip my controlling stake. PR directives issued to Gwen Hartley targeting my reputation. The room grew colder with each reveal. I paused only once, to let them absorb it. These actions are not just unethical, they violate multiple clauses of our corporate charter, as well as fiduciary duty standards required of this board. Vanessa finally spoke, voice tight. "This is a mischaracterization. My mother was offering guidance, not directives. The draft agreements were never executed. You are weaponizing incomplete context." I met her gaze without flinching. "Intent matters, Vanessa, and so does pattern. You built an entire campaign on my erasure. You made one mistake." I clicked to the final slide. "You didn't delete everything." The screen displayed my father's video. "If they don't thank you in time, don't wait. The truth has its own clock." Silence fell over the room like a dropped curtain. No one spoke. No one moved. And the narrative shifted forever. Richard cleared his throat, voice strained. "Ms. Whitmore, Claire, what remedy do you seek?" I answered without hesitation. "Formal correction of all corporate records to reflect my role as founder and majority stakeholder. Immediate termination of Gwen Hartley. Public statement acknowledging the manipulation attempt. And effective immediately, Vanessa Whitmore steps down from all leadership functions." Gasps rippled through the room. Richard looked to Vanessa. "Vanessa," she opened her mouth, then closed it. The fight had drained from her eyes. She saw what I saw. Checkmate. Richard turned back to me. "We will vote. The record stands." I nodded once, returned to my seat. My pulse remained steady, breath controlled. Not from triumph, from release. The story they tried to erase had just been carved into stone. My phone buzzed under the table. "Silas, media is already moving. Statement drafts ready. One more thing. Evelyn just requested a private." I stared at the message, fingers poised. Evelyn. Of course she would. And that meeting would be the true final chapter. Sometimes power isn't about winning. It's about knowing when to walk away with your name intact. The boardroom emptied with a different weight this time. Not hurried, not triumphant. Heavy, measured. Vanessa left without a word, her legal counsel trailing behind, eyes downcast. I remained seated until the last of the rustle faded, giving space for the air to shift fully. For the first time in years, it felt mine again. Silas's message still glowed on my phone screen. Evelyn just requested a private meeting. I stared at the text, fingers unmoving for a beat. Other. Not Vanessa. Not PR. Not the board. Her. By the time I reached the private lounge, Evelyn was already seated, alone, no assistance, no mask of boardroom formality, just her, and the weight of everything unsaid between us. She looked up as I entered. Claire. Mother. I sat across from her, back straight, expression calm. Let her speak first. She did. I imagine you think me a monster. I think you made choices, and you underestimated the one person who wouldn't forget them. A flicker crossed her face, part weariness, part something close to regret. It was never supposed to come to this, she said softly. And yet here we are, I replied. For a moment, silence stretched between us, not strained, not combative, just honest. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a slim envelope, sliding it across the table. Your father left this. I chose not to share it. I won't justify that. I picked it up, weighing its small heft against the larger history between us. Read it when you're ready, she said, voice quieter now, not for leverage, for clarity. I met her gaze fully then. The time for leverage is over. You can't erase me anymore. A faint, tired smile tugged at her lips. I know. For the first time, no pretense hung between us, just two women seated across a table, the space between them filled with more history than either could rewrite. Then we're done here, I said gently, rising. She didn't argue. Claire. I paused. Whatever else you choose next, make it yours. Not his, not mine, yours. I nodded once, it always was, and with that I left. Outside, the storm had broken, clouds scattered in slow retreat, shafts of late afternoon sun slicing through the sky. I walked alone to my car, envelope in hand, resolve in my bones. No fanfare, no camera flashes, just freedom. That evening, back in my apartment, I poured a glass of wine and finally opened the envelope. Inside, a single handwritten note from my father. If you're reading this, you fought for what mattered, and no matter what they tell you, you earned your place. Let them keep the spotlight. You hold the foundation. I folded the note carefully, hands steady. Then I updated my professional bio, founder, majority stakeholder, architect of legacy. And beneath it, a final line. I build foundations. I no longer ask for permission. As dusk fell, I walked the long way home, past the Whitmore estate. Its windows glowed softly, distant. Through the front kitchen window, I caught a fleeting glimpse of Vanessa, alone at the table, gaze downcast, arms crossed, a letter in front of her. Perhaps mine, perhaps her own reckoning. I didn't pause. I didn't wave. I didn't need to anymore. When I reached my building, a final message from Silas awaited. Board vote unanimous. Corrections entered. Media brief cleared. Your name stands. I exhaled. Not relief. Closure. Thank you for staying with us through this powerful story of resilience, betrayal, and redemption. Claire's journey reminds us all, when others try to erase your worth, the strongest move is to stand tall and write your own ending. If this story resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss more inspiring tales we have coming. And remember, your voice matters. Your truth matters. Until next time, take care. and keep standing strong.